Welcome students. In this session, we will be covering the course title, that is Classical Taxonomy and Phylogeny. The unit name is Origin and Evolution of Angiosperms. Module name is Primitive Living Angiosperms. Myself, Dr. Nisha Kewat. I am Assistant Professor from Government College of Arts, Science and Commerce, Sakri, Goa. In this session, we will be covering the two opposing views, that is Angiosperm school and Bayesian school about the primitive living angiosperms, and we will see about the various primitive characters of the families such as Magnoliaceae, Winteraceae, Degeneraceae, and Calicanthaceae. At the end of this session, the learning outcomes of this presentation will be: a student will understand the two opposing points of views on primitive living angiosperms. They will be able to list the various angiosperm families which are considered as primitive. At the end, it will also help them to explain the reasons for their primitiveness. So, coming to the first slide, that is, what is primitive living angiosperms? About the primitive living angiosperm, there are two opposing points of view. First one is Angiosperm school, which considers Amentiferrae, particularly the Cajurinaceae family, to be the most primitive family among the dicots. And the other opposing view is Bayesian school, which considers a family having bisexual flowers of magnoliales to be the most primitive. However, in addition to the previous two views, there are Paleo-Hobbes theory which are also emerging as a strong contender. Coming to the first view, that is Angiosperm school view. According to this view, which is now heavily rejected, but according to them, Amentiferrae, which has reduced unisexual flowers in catkin fluorescence, are considered as the most living angiosperms. In support of this Angiosperm school, there are two taxonomies, namely Randall 1892 and Wettstein 1935, also considered Cajurinaceae to be the most primitive dicot family, and one which is derived from Aphidraceae. However, over the studies, it has been known that Cajurinaceae and the other members which belongs to the Amentiferrae have happened to have many advanced characters. Such one of them is a tricolpate pollen grains. In addition to that, they have a wood anatomy which is relatively advanced, and their simplicity of flower is due to the reduction in the size of the flower rather than being a primitive. Moreover, they have also achieved anemophily, that is the wind pollination. They have trilaminar nodes, cyclic stamens, and they have a syncarpous pistil with the axile placentation. So these are the some of the advanced characters which are being noticed in Cajurinaceae, and therefore this view was rejected. If you see this image, in this A is a male inflorescence, then B is a portion of the male inflorescence which is taken one, whereas C is a male flower with a single stamen, D is a part of a female inflorescence, then E is a fruit, and F is a seed with a broad wing. So these are the general characters which are exhibited by the Cajurinaceae, and more specifically a single example by Cajurina superba. So these are the some of the characters which are also considered as the advanced characters. Coming to the second opposing views, that is Bayesian school. According to this, it is also called as the Rennellian school, which considers the Rennellian complex, which includes magnoliales having the bisexual flowers with free, equal, spirally arranged floral parts, as a representative of the most primitive angiosperms. Under Bayesian school, that is Magnoliaceae, and in support of that, Bayesian 1950, Hutchinson 1959, 1973, Takhtajan 1966-1969, and Cronquist 1968 former are the well-known taxonomists who has worked about these primitive living angiosperms, and they have supported the Bayesian school of theory about the primitive living angiosperm. According to them, primitive living angiosperms should have a large solitary flower of magnolia, that is magnolia the primitive theory, with an elongated floral axis bearing numerous spirally arranged stamens and carpels. If they have possessed these characters, they are considered as the most primitive living angiosperms, or they are the most primitive living representative which we see today. This is the picture of the Magnolia campbelli. You can see that they have the spirally arranged whorls, then stamens in the center. These are the characters of the primitive living angiosperm which have been discussed in the previous slide. Also, reasons for Magnoliaceae being primitive are stamens are laminar, which means that stamens cannot be differentiated or without the differentiation into the filament and the anther. So they are undifferentiated, and pollen grains are monosulcate and they are boat shaped. Coming to the Winteraceae, Magnolia being most primitive living angiosperm, this opinion was challenged by Gottsberger 1974 and Thorne in 1976. According to them, Magnolia was not a most primitive living angiosperm, but according to them, Winteraceae, which is having a middle-sized flower with a fewer stamens and carpels, and which are grouped in a lateral clusters, which is seen in a Winteraceae, are considered as a primitive living angiosperms, and to exhibit that, Dramys is a genera which is being taken as an example. Reasons for Winteraceae being primitive: first of all, they have occurrence of the similar stamens and carpels. There is an absence of the xylem vessels. Their morphology is very similar to the pteridosperms. Pteridosperms are basically an intermediate between the ferns and the seed-bearing plants. So they have that morphology of Winteraceae which is similar to the pteridosperms. Thirdly, they have a high chromosome number, and they also have a less specialized beetle pollination, which can be included under anemophily, that is insect pollination. Lastly, they have less specialized beetle pollination, that is insect pollination of Dramys, which is seen as compared to the Magnolia. According to the Takhtajan 1980 and 1987, he acknowledged that plants having moderate sized flowers of D. genera and Winteraceae are the primitive compared to the previous opinions. Larger flowers of Magnolia and Nymphaceae are of a secondary origin. However, Takhtajan considered D. generaceae to be the most primitive family of living angiosperm. But according to the Cronquist, that is 1981 and 1988, he also discarded the Magnolia to be the primitive living angiosperms, but considered Winteraceae to be the most primitive living angiosperm. Reasons for D. generaceae being primitive is, first of all, they have a spiral, entire, exstipulate leaves. Exstipulate means leaves without a stipules. They have a large axillary flowers and they have many tepals but with single carpel. Vessel elements are present and they have a scalary form of perforations. Stigma runs the entire length of the carpel and pollen is a boat shape. Laminar stamens with 3 veins. Fruit is a follicle type and its embryo is with 3 to 4 cotyledons. This is a picture of a D. generaceae represented by the D. genera whitenensis. You have A, that is a branch with flowers. B is a stamen, which is having a boat-shaped anthers. C is a transverse section of a carpel. Coming to the Callincanthaceae, there were in the former slides we had discussed the various views about the primitive living angiosperm. In addition to that, there were other taxonomists who had a different opinion about the primitive angiosperms. Those were the taxonomists called Lockentine and Stevenson 1991. According to them, poorly differentiated, numerous spirally arranged tepals are one of the characters of the primitive angiosperms, having opposite leaves, few ovulate carpels, strobilar flowers, unilacunar 2 trace nodes, shrub habit, leaf-like bracteopetals, leaf-like stamens, vessels with scalariform perforation, beetle pollination, CO2 elements with starch inclusions are some of the characters which should be considered as a primitive, and this has been exhibited by the Calicanthaceae family. The family Calicanthaceae is regarded as the most basal family of the order Laurels. It is interesting to note that the genus Angiospermum, which was recognized as a new genus based on the Calicanthus australiensis by S.T. Blake in 1972, now is also considered as the most primitive flowering plant by these authors. Andrews in 1983 had described in all respects Angiospermum gives the impression of a strange living fossil, and they consider this as a primitive living angiosperm. If we talk about the placement of the primitive angiosperms, in the recent classification system, they are being placed just before the monocots. However, they are neither grouped in monocot and not in dicots, so they are considered as a basal living angiosperms. Coming to summary, in this session we learnt about what exactly are the primitive living angiosperms, different views which are proposed to consider the various families as a primitive living angiosperms. We studied the various vegetative and the reproductive characters that are exhibited by the families, supporting their primitiveness. Then over the time, we also learnt about the various advancement in understanding about the various primitive living angiosperms. References. Thank you.